Hey, everybody. So, my name is Brandon, and I wanted to come out here and I'm going to be talking about, just a little bit about myself. And this will probably be the first official video of the Day One channel where I'll be creating video content concerning matters of faith and culture, society, and just speaking maybe to things from a biblical uh, Christian worldview perspective and addressing or speaking to these issues and many controversial topics, subjects, all that stuff, that is going on in society and in our culture and stuff. I don't think there are other people already doing it, but I've been just, there's a lot on my mind, and I just thought I'd share it, give my voice, put my voice out there. uh I don't think I'm somebody special or anything like that, but if you find my thoughts valuable and you find them to be somewhat beneficial to you, or you think they might be beneficial to other people that you know, then please share it. Or you think it might build up the church and help in some type of way, just share. That helps a lot. And I don't really have any real goal. I just feel like I need to do this. So I want to start off, though, for those who, with my first video, I want to start off with talking about what is the most recent thing happening with me. And I feel like that's good. Maybe just being a little bit authentic and transparent. And so for me, something that recently has been going on was I've been going down this line, not necessarily deconstruction, but studying and investigating the how can you say it? Excuse me. Investigating the teachings of a particular, let's say, denomination, for lack of a better term, and I have come to the conclusion that it is uh, that I've come to the conclusion that it is necessary not just for me to become a part of this denominational church, but that I truly believe, and I believe that many or all Christians should be a part of this church or this denomination, however you might want to say it. And so, as I get into this, I want to say I fought this tooth and nail, but the Lord really was the one that kind of drew me into this, and it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was actually fighting it really hard. And so, without adding too much suspense, let me just get into it. About 6 months ago, I was on X or Twitter, the new Twitter, and there was a post of a Catholic, of a Protestant who had become Catholic. Now, that should just be the dead giveaway. I am 99% sure that I should be becoming Catholic. I have maybe some reserve, like a 1% reserve, but I've assessed nearly nearly every major doctrine that I had an issue with coming from the Catholic Church, and every single one of those teachings and have held up against the scrutiny that I've given it as somebody who heavily spoke against Catholicism. I strongly spoke out against it. So let me just give a little bit of a background on myself, right, as I get into this. It started with that testimony that I saw, but I'll go a little bit further back. So I grew up Catholic, but I was never like really devout, and I went to Catholic school my whole life. But about 10 years ago, around March, I became a born again believer, as we would call that, and I was part of a non-denominational charismatic church, and that's where I really heard the Lord speaking to me. I really had these encounters with God, and I was what people would call regenerated or born again, and so from there, that's where my faith became real. And a lot of you guys who probably watch this actually know that you've seen me, you know me, and you've seen my life. At least who will see this initially. So, um, yeah, my faith became really real. For me, I left Catholicism because my dad, even way before, even visiting this church, this non-denominational charismatic church, it's a mouthful. Um, he had told me that praying to Mary isn't in the Bible, and for me, I already knew. I was like that everything God wanted us to know is in the Bible. So if praying to Mary isn't in the Bible, then why would I be Catholic? Like Catholic, like that doesn't make any sense. So I slowly started to move away from it, and It took a while, and then I remember I was 16, and at 16 is when I just gave my life to the Lord and fully surrendered, and I started to live a life devoted and committed to serving Him. And so I had gone to college. I had some, difficulty with theology and stuff like that. Some of the things that I was taught were kind of confusing and everything. And maybe I'll even make a video about that. Like, for me, some of the teachings that I had been receiving, I just had struggle formulating my own theology because of the teachings that were available to me, whether in person or through YouTube. Like listening to teachers online or preachers. It definitely made some things confusing. But by the time I went to college, in 2019, at this point that would be about 5 years ago. That's when I really had started to break some of the confusion, and I became passionate about theology because I realized that there was a structure. So at that point, I was 5 years into the faith, and then super confused because I never had sound teaching. And then I started to experience sound teaching, sound doctrine. And what I mean by that is just just a basic explanation of what salvation is, or what sanctification is, or justification, or what the Trinity is, and how starting an atonement, breaking down the fundamental doctrines of the faith, clarified the faith for me so much. And the college that I went to was not really it was non-denominational, or maybe you could say interdenominational. It wasn't really a church that was, or a school or university that had a specific theological position that it was trying to push onto the students. So I really appreciated that. It was more focused. I studied biblical and theological studies. That was my major. So the goal really was to teach the method, the hermeneutical method, and the maybe the so in the three spaces when it came to theology, it was how do you think theologically? That was more the goal, to teach you how to think theologically, not to get you to be convinced or to defend a specific theological position, but how to think theologically. Then there was the hermeneutical side, or the exegetical side, whichever one is maybe the more proper term, where you look to understand the you understand the method, or you learn the method of studying scripture in its original context, both culturally and contextually, like within the text. And so then the third, I think, would be pastoral, but we didn't really in my degree program, we didn't do too much of that. So anyway, so they really taught methodology. And so for me, I gravitated to it, and I grasped it, and I applied it, and it was able to help me to think theologically through teachings, and I was able to hear more clearly. And when pastors would preach, I'm like, oh snap, I can, now I see, now I can hear, now I can understand, and now I can filter some of this stuff through these methods that they have taught me. So if people are interested in that, then they're like, yeah, sure, I could share that. But I share that because what happened after that was, at one point, I was struggling a lot with my theology, with my understanding of the faith, and then it started to gradually and then substantially become stronger and better. So I had a much more grounded, I feel like this is very essential, that I had a much more grounded position in my walk and in my faith. And I I had more I was more solid. I was more on a firm foundation, let's say, than I had ever been in the last 10 years of my walk. I had finally come to this place where I'm solid. And so I wasn't looking for something because, or looking into Catholicism, or looking into anything because I needed something. What I was doing was I was looking into it because of a testimony I heard that I felt like that's very weird. So what happened was, let me get into that, and then I'll get into the pure logical reasoning behind every Christian, especially Protestant Christian, should feel a mandate, a necessity to look into this thing. And I'll explain later. But there was a testimony that I heard, and I was on X, I was on Twitter or whatever. And as I'm listening, what it was there was a guy, a Protestant, he had become Catholic. And I thought that was probably the most ridiculous thing. I was like, what? Who? I even laughed in the moment. I remember too. I was like, who becomes Catholic? Like, what do you have to hear or do in order for you to be a Protestant who's already free from the Catholic Church? Like, you're enlightened. You know everything. Why would you ever go back to Catholicism? It made no sense to me. And what he was I think he was Calvinist. Like he fell under Calvinism somewhere, maybe Presbyterian or something. I don't know. But anyway, I went out to go look. I looked into it, and he starts to reference the early church and how the one quote that I can remember the most was that the more he looked, his main goal actually was to disprove the Catholic Church by looking at the early church fathers. That's what he ventured out to do as a seminarian. So his goal was to study the early church fathers, disprove the Catholic faith, because again, he's Protestant, and it actually ended up making him Catholic. So that was very interesting to me. It struck me from an intellectual standpoint. And so then I watched another testimony, right? And so the other video that followed that was actually a Methodist pastor who had become Catholic, which I thought again was very crazy. I thought that was very confusing. I was like, why would this is a pastor? And I think he was pastoring for like it had to be over a decade. I can't even remember how long. But it was like 10, maybe 15, 20 years, I don't know. But he was a Methodist pastor, married, had children. This was his full-time job, so to speak, right? Like, so his provision came from serving the church, and he decided to become a Catholic. And I was like, yo, what? Like, that's so weird, right? And so I listened to his story. His story really struck me. It sucks because maybe I'll find their actual testimonies and I'll post them below or something like that, so people who are interested can actually go watch it. But I thought that those two things were interesting. So one was on the intellectual front. The other was, I can't remember, but I think it was, I don't remember. Let me not even speak to it. But I know for his wife, it was more of an experiential conversion. For him, I can't really remember. But both of those testimonies really spoke to me. So I felt the need and the need to be like, okay, if there's any validity to this, I need to know. And if there isn't, then I need to prove it. And why I couldn't just walk away from that is because of this very like essential piece point, which I think every Christian, every believer should have. I think we should all have a very high view of truth and a strong desire to pursue truth above everything else, above being compassionate, above being loving, above our main goal should be to seek truth, find truth, and to be able to apply truth. And if it's not, we will then settle for deceptions and deviations from the truth and then be content with that, which I have a conviction and a belief that that's wrong. I don't believe that you should be settling for deceptions or deviations from the truth because they make you happy, because you don't feel like, going through some shaking up to your foundation, to your beliefs. I really think that you should be consistently seeking out truth, because Christ is truth. He's not separate from it. He's not a lie. He is truth. So if you continue to seek for truth, I feel like that's the best and the most efficient, effective way, I guess you could say, to as a believer, looking for truth on a theological front will help us to understand God better, and also to see Him clearer, and to be intimate with Him. Now, you can definitely be intimate with God apart from that. I'm not saying you can't. Obviously, I've been a part of a non-denominational charismatic church for 10 years. And not that particular church, but that's just been the space that I've been in. So I know from new believer to old believer, like you could be in the faith for however many years and not know things, you not have some type of theological conviction and still be intimate with the Lord. But then there's going to come times when questions come up like, can I lose my salvation? How important is baptism? What does it mean that Christ died on the cross? If I backslide, can I be forgiven? Like, there's a lot that can go into it. Some people fall into heresies like Unitarianism. Other people fall into extremes on the other end, which might be considered also heresies, where you believe like God meticulously selects and commands almost every single action. But anyway, that's for you guys to try to look into on your own. But for doctrines, there's actually multiple interpretations of the same doctrines. So like baptism, I think there's three different views of baptism. There's different views of justification. There's different views of salvation. There's different beliefs about how sanctification plays into salvation and justification and so on and so forth. And there's some that don't believe that sanctification has any effect on your justification. And so I know a lot of these words are just being thrown out. There's a lot of shins at the end of it. I say all that because I just want somebody who's listening to be able to like think, maybe if they haven't heard this terminology or haven't thought about these things, maybe it'll broaden your scope, broaden your horizons of what you can go into and study and look into. Because I know for me, like I never even heard these things. I never heard this terminology. I never understood it. And when I went to college, and it helped me tremendously. And so I started to understand the faith in a different level, on a deeper level than just on the surface of like, how can I apply scripture to help me be a better Christian? And I'm not saying that that's not necessary, because we do have to exemplify Christ in the earth. But there's way more than just like, oh, what does the Bible mean to me? Or how can I use this and just be a better person? That can even turn into Christian moralism, which is another form of legalism. And anyway, I'm starting to deviate a little bit, right? So if you have a high view of truth, I think that you should seek out truth the moment you're presented with something that conflicts with what you've believed before. And that's what happened with me. So for me, Catholicism, people are converting to Catholicism. This is weird. So I have to look into that. Let me look into it. But I remember the Lord drawing me and pulling me specifically to the Roman Catholic expression, to the Roman Rite or the Latin Rite. So without getting into it a lot, there's a few different expressions of Catholicism. So anyway, that I did not want to do. I was super, super against it. I didn't want to do it. I felt like if I was to look into it, then like, I don't know, I just had like such a strong position against Roman Catholicism. And then there was the Eastern Orthodox. And I tried to look into the Eastern Orthodox as much as I could, but every single time the Lord, it was like shutting a door in front of me. And he kept telling me, look into Roman Catholicism, look into that. And I hate, if I could tell you how much tension I had with that and how much that was like difficult for me, because I had openly spoken out against many of the teachings of Catholicism. And I already had like a thing against it, like a personal, I don't know what it was, but I already felt like this personal, like, not aggression, but like distaste for it and maybe disdain. And so it was really uncomfortable. And I didn't understand why the Lord was telling me that. And so as I'm doing that, I'm like, man, all right, I'm gonna start with the hardest one. What's up with Mary? And so I started and then slowly I started looking into every single doctrine or teaching or practice of Catholicism. And as I continued to look into them, I had seen without a shadow of a doubt every single argument that I had against either a teaching or an expression or a practice of the Catholic faith. They had an answer to every single one of my arguments. And that was really hard. And so I had to concede on each one at a time. I'm like, okay, well, there's actually a solid answer. And this took months. And then I remember the Lord was telling me to convert to Catholicism. And I was like, no, like I'm not doing that. And that was really hard too. I remember telling my wife, she didn't like it. And that was like 2 months in. And we played with the idea of like, I told her, I was like, yo, look, babe, I don't know, I don't understand, but I feel like the Lord might be telling me to become Catholic. And both of us thought about and have wrestled with, or not wrestled, but like she had given me the thought and I've had to think about it. And okay, Lord, are you just showing me these practices of the early church that, maybe you want me to apply somehow in ministry somewhere, some way, or like, do you want me to just teach these things? Is it important for us to know? And I will like share the teachings that I've come to understand because they're biblical. And so, yeah, one of the things, like one thing led to another. And what I realized was that one should or must become Catholic. And this will go into the final part of this video, which is me giving the most reasonable, logical, like before we even touch theology and scripture and all that stuff, which you guys can please like ask your questions if you have questions. And I'll see how I can get to them and respond to them, because I'm pretty sure every question, thought, everything you got I'm telling you, like I had wrestled with it, and I put Catholicism under a lot of scrutiny, and every argument held up, every teaching, everything that I have gone down. I think there's maybe like only two things that from Catholicism that I haven't looked into with depth or looked into in depth. Um, and I'm still like in the process of doing that, but I've just come to that conclusion. Like I'm 99% sure, like I'm going to be converting back to Catholicism or converting to Catholicism. Um, and so yeah, the most reasonable or logical argument that I can make that should not mean that you become Catholic, but this is the thing. In the beginning of the church, or the starting of the church, there were only there was only one church. And so I want you to follow me on this. I want you to consider this and be patient and don't jump to an argument. If you're listening to me, please just like consider what I'm saying. Excuse me. In the beginning, there was a church. There was only one church, and it was founded by Jesus. It started with the apostles, and then the disciples of those apostles. And even, there was like 120 in the upper room. It was the disciples left behind by Jesus, but the apostles were the 12 or the 11 at the time. Then they put Matthias in, and they were the ones who were the heads and the leaders of the church. Now, how did Matthias become an apostle? Well, it was by the laying on of hands, right? So as you can see, Matthias, who was just a disciple, the apostles lay hands on another man, on another disciple, they become an apostle as well. And so the apostles then function as the first heads of the church, or the bishops of the church. The apostles continue to lay hands on individuals to make them bishops, make them overseers, just as Paul talks about in Timothy. And they continue to lay hands on people. And so you have the church growing by the laying on of hands. You continue to have leadership in the church. And to continue down the line, if you look at early church history, you'll see that the early church fought to preserve Orthodox teaching. Now, this was for 1,000 years. There was one church. So I want somebody to really think. For 1,000 years, there has been one church, and then there's a schism, and you get the Eastern Orthodox, and you get the Roman Catholics. So there's a church split, a huge church split. One side is east, one side is west. You have this separation. Now, 600 years go on, or no, another 400 years continue. And there's another split among the Catholic Church where you get Martin Luther, you get the Protestants. So you have this long line. Let's see if I can use the wall. So, long line. It's like, whoop, boom. This is all one church for 1,000 years. And then there's a church split. And then there's the Eastern Orthodox. And there's the Roman Catholics. The Roman Catholics continue on. And then there's another break in the timeline. So for Roman Catholics, they continue going. But then you have, right here, you have the Protestants. Probably should have did that on the back wall. But you have Protestants who come 600 years ago from 2020, right? Or 20 from the year 2000. So for the last 600 years, there have been Protestants around. But now let's just look historically. Let's just look at this very reasonably. And this is probably the number one thing that has convinced me early on that there's no justifiable reason for anyone to be Protestant. For anyone to be Protestant. Everybody who's listening to me, if you are a Protestant, you you have no justifiable reason, I believe, for you to be Protestant today. I understand what happened before. That's different. But to be outside of the Catholic Church, I believe there's no justifiable reason. Why? Because there was only two churches. And the teachings between the Protestants and the Catholics are so dramatically different that how can you make a claim that you know the truth or you believe the truth, but the Catholic Church does not, but yet the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox, they both stem all the way back to the apostles. They were both in unity in teaching, in matters of faith and in morals for 1,000 years. And then the Protestants come and they say everything in the last 1,400 years that is a part of Catholicism. So, of course, these numbers, hopefully you can imagine these numbers. Because in 1,400, in the year 1400 something, that's when Martin Luther came and there was like the split, right? So that's in the 1400s. Now, even before that, there was John Huss and all this stuff. But with Martin Luther, there was the split, the Reformation. Now, that's 400 years after the last split. The last split between the East and the West, they were in unity for 1,000 years. So for the Protestants today, we should be going back and looking into the first 1,000 years of church history to understand what the church taught and knew and understood. But to ignore 1,000 years of church history and then to practice the faith looking nothing like the first 1,000 years of the church history, you can be ignorant. But then secondly, you could be 1,000% arrogant not to look at it. If you think, and as a Protestant, every person who practices the faith, subconsciously, I believe, believes that they are walking in truth. But now let's ask, if you're walking in truth, I'm not saying that you're not walking with the Lord, like you don't have a relationship with God. Yes, you can have a relationship with the Lord. You can like have fellowship with His Spirit, all that stuff. Knowing theological information does not mean that you do or do not have a relationship with God. That's besides the point. But we're speaking specifically about truth. And so for some people, a lot of people will be like, well, the truth doesn't matter. Like, it just matters that I have a relationship with Jesus. Please be careful with saying that. Please just really be careful with making a claim that truth doesn't matter. Theological teaching, what you believe about the faith that you say you are a part of, does not matter. All that matters is your intimacy or your relationship with Jesus. Because when you do that, then you get all these different expressions of the faith. And what I realized was that over time, what's happened is that everybody has been able, ever since the Reformation, everybody has had a right to have their own opinion about the scriptures. And as a result, and then declare what is true and what isn't true. This is why there's different denominations. So if you really think about the Reformation and what happened, you had one long line of 1,400 years of a single church that had a schism around 1,000 years. But let's just talk about from Catholicism. And this argument isn't even validating. This is not to validate Catholicism. What this does is this argument is to validate Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and that every Protestant should be either Eastern Orthodox or Catholic, or either Eastern Orthodox or Catholic. If you're not, I think you're in great error. Now that you've heard this, at least since you've heard this or you've become aware of it somewhere else, now that you're hearing this, I think that if you continue on just ignoring it, you're going to put yourself in a position of error. So in some ways, it's probably better if you didn't watch this video, if you feel contentious and you don't want to look into it. But I'm telling you, you're now responsible for what you believe. And if for 1,000 years there's unified teaching of the faith, and we don't look into it, and we don't practice it, and we have no idea what it teaches, we only pick and choose what we believe of it, then we're the ones that are in error. And then you have a split between the two. You have to now study the split. Why was there a split between Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics? Oh. So then when you become aware of the split, you then can maybe decide from there, right? You start to assess, okay, what's Catholicism about? What is Eastern Orthodox about? And you can assess the two. And you can do that fairly. But for somebody to think, for a Protestant to think that they know the truth or they are walking in truth and in the fullness of truth, they are ignorant, or they can be just arrogant. And again, the reason why I say this is because after the Reformation, every person who was a part of Protestantism made claims of truth apart from those who received the laying on of hands. This is another major point, because what I said before was that the apostles, they laid hands on people. And so there's what's called apostolic succession. So you have the authority of the apostles being granted to other members of the church, by which they then become authoritative figures in the church, and authoritative to teach the faith, and authoritative to keep the faith, while the lay or the sheep, those who are members of the body or the congregants, let's say, while they come, they are being taught by these men who have received the laying on of hands. So once you break away from them and you start to teach up in opposition to what they're teaching, well, then you have to claim that you are a greater authority than that authority that was bestowed upon those who had received the laying on of hands by apostolic, that have received apostolic succession by the laying on of hands, tracing back to the apostles. And if you make the claim that you have a greater revelation than 1,400 years of church history, I believe you're in great error. There is no way that you can make a claim that you, out of nowhere, after 1,400 years, after 2,000 years of church history, all of a sudden you come around and you have the truth. And that's actually like what that's the baseline definition of either cultism or what's the other word? Like being a false prophet. Declaring that you yourself have the truth. Nobody else has the truth. But if you believe what I say, then you will be saved. I don't know. That's probably the better way. I don't think a lot of Protestants don't believe that, though. A lot of Protestants don't believe if you believe what I believe, then you're saved or something like that. There are some who believe that. I would say that that's cultish. There are others who don't. And so it's not cultish, but there's an underlying claim to being some prophet, but yet you're in contention with the church. Now, what I would think is that if you were to break away from the Catholic Church, you would then go and you would become a part of a church that has apostolic succession and adhere to the teachings that have been withheld since the time of the apostles and that have been developed and sharpened and clarified over that 1,000 years before the split. The other biggest option would be Eastern Orthodoxy. Then there's, discussions about, like other small churches and stuff like that. But I say all that to present the baseline argument from a logical perspective, just looking at church history. If you look at church history, you should consider these things, these things that I'm saying, these arguments, let's say, and really start to assess theologically and with integrity. Okay, how can I really say that what I believe is correct over 1,000 years of teaching, but then not know at all what they taught within the first 1,000 years? So just using that argument, that reasoning, that's why I knew that there was no justifiable reason for somebody to be Protestant. So from the very beginning, I was like, I have to either become Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. And that is not because I need to do that so that I can be saved. It is not so, well, I would say this. If you become aware of this conundrum and you ignore it, I would say the Lord will 1,000% hold you accountable for your ignorance, your arrogance, for your pride. And I don't know what that's going to look like for you. But if you are humble enough to hear what I said and then consider and go back to look into investigate, then I think you will find yourself discovering a fullness of the faith that you have not seen before. And that you will see that you would see so much more beauty in the faith than what you find in Protestantism. Because at least in charismatic and Pentecostal circles, there's beauty in encountering God, which is also found with the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics. In fact, there are actual charismatics in both of those churches, the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics, but that's besides the point. Even with the experiential side to the charismatic and Pentecostal branches of Protestantism, you still have so much more. Like I would say that that's the beauty of being intimate with God, but that's not the beauty of the faith of what He has left us. There's so much more. I say all that because once I started to discover and unwrap unravel some of these things, I started, like, I genuinely had a sense of like, Lord, this is crazy, and they've had this whole time, and this is beautiful. The faith is beautiful. Um, and so yeah, I think Protestantism. This is the last thing that I'll say about Protestantism, and I say this strongly. I say this so strongly. Protestantism is like postmodernism, but for Christian theology. It's the idea that there's no objective truth, that subjective truth takes precedence over any idea or form of objective truth or claims of objective truth. And so you can just declare what you believe is right and you'll be right without being challenged by anybody. And you can break off into denominations and just start your own camp and just be like, yeah, like it doesn't matter what they believe, they're Christians too. And yeah, we just believe what we believe, blah blah blah. There's no thought anymore given to theology unless you're like, maybe reformed or something like that. But especially in the non-denominational spaces, there's no thought given to what you believe. There's no thought at all given to theology, to doctrine. It's just, oh, I don't even know what it is. Like, and I see why people get so worked up over the teachings and the preachings that come out of like certain mega churches, because it's absent of things that of the beauty of the faith and the things that matter according to who we are as believers. You have nothing. You have no tradition, and people in Protestantism, tradition has been so slandered. But what do you think? Like, you look at the Jews, they've had tradition, and you can see it today, and it's beautiful. Like, people even can make the argument with Hinduism that just tradition, not the religious aspect, but like the traditional aspect is beautiful to some degree, right? They'll find beauty in the traditions of different places, but then Protestants were like, no, tradition's stupid, and then they just like got rid of it all. Look, I don't know, man. I don't know what you guys think. If you've held around and you stuck around, to listen to this, then I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate it. I hope that it was, like thought provoking enough for you, and that you too, you go down the line of like trying to learn or figure out some of these things. For me, it was really difficult. And the whole channel is not going to be, the content that I make, video content, is not going to be solely on Catholicism. So if you made it this far, then maybe you'll know this point. No, I'm not going to be making videos just solely on Catholicism. It will be on a variety of things. However, I do think that discussing with Protestants, with those who are outside of the Catholic faith, and even Eastern Orthodoxy, what you believe really matters, and you have to reassess what you think and what you believe. So yeah, and just to testify or to share the testimony, there are a lot of Protestants right now returning to either Eastern Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism. So if you think that I'm tripping, this is actually happening everywhere. And it's something that I really believe the Lord is doing. And now, you might want to assess between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, and it might be easier to look at Eastern Orthodoxy because there's so much against Catholicism and blah, blah, blah. Like, I had the same thing going on with me. And some people will say, I think between the two, like Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics, they'll say, no, they're heretics, or no, they're not saved, or like whatever, they're pointing fingers at each other too because of their schism. That's besides the point. All I care about is that Protestants return back to some apostolic church, return to apostolic succession, because there's no justifiable reason. Even the Catholic Church recognizes the Eastern Orthodox as having valid sacraments. Anyway, I say all that that hopefully you guys are stirred, you guys are interested, curious, and you go out to actually investigate these things yourself, no matter how hard it is, that you seek with integrity and that you seek with honesty and with humility, and you do not look to try to be, very arrogant and so proud of your Protestantism, because again, it's like postmodernism, meaning like it's relative. Everything is relative. Like, you can believe whatever you want, nobody cares, just make your own denomination and you're good. and then you just fight among other Protestants, or like a non-denominational church, you just mind your own business and act like you don't exist, and all you do is like stick to, I don't know, some other type of thing. This is not to criticize the fruit that comes out of the church outside of Catholicism. In no way am I criticizing the fruit, and in no way am I speaking to people's salvation. Not even the Catholic Church would say that those who are outside of the Catholic Church can have not received saving grace. Like, you're only saved if you're a part of the Catholic Church. That's not what I'm saying. And I don't believe, and I know the Catholic Church doesn't teach that either. So this is not that's not the argument at all. And I don't believe that the Eastern Orthodox teach that either. So yeah, we're all still a part of the body of Christ. And that's still what I believe. But I just wanted to make that clear. So thank you if you have listened this far. Thank you for listening. And if this is in any way you think is worthy of being heard by other people, please share it. And that's all. So stick around. The channel, the content will be under the name Dei One. Thank you for listening again. And yeah, please leave your comments, your questions, and all that stuff below. And hopefully I can make videos about that stuff too. So thank you. God bless you guys. And yeah, love y'all.